welcome to Keep the Bastards Honest, the podcast of the Australian Democrats. I'm your host, Elana Mitchell, and on this episode, meet our candidate in the by-election for Fadden. Chris Simpson is a former builder and building project manager who was part of the team that ran for the Senate in Queensland in 2022 and was our spokesperson on housing. He is representing the Australian Democrats in the by-election of Fadden, called when the current member, Stuart Robert, resigned earlier this year. Chris is one of 13 candidates contesting the by-election, and he joined my co-host Steve Baty and I to discuss what has driven him to put his hand up not once but twice to represent the Australian Democrats in elections, but also the kind of Australia he sees as a migrant and the child of migrants, and what kind of country we can be. Just a note, Chris emigrated from what was once Burma in the 1960s. Burma was not renamed Myanmar until 1989, and in our discussion he refers to the country of his birth as Burma in the context of the time of his family migrating to Australia. Chris, Steve and I pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we recorded this episode and their elders past and present. Sovereignty never ceded. Chris, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you on. It's been a long time coming, I think. So just to give our listeners some background on who you were part of our Senate team for the Queensland division in the 2022 election. So you've run for us before, and now you put your flak jacket back on and gone out on the hustings on behalf of us in Fadden. Tell us about the whole thing, like how you came to be a Democrat, your personal history, and why you want to serve the people of Fadden.
I'll start with the Australian Democrats. We have to remember that I was a young man who started as an apprenticeship when I heard the words "keeping the bastards honest." And I can't help but say that the delusionment of 1975 and all of those things that led up to 1977, and when Don Shipp, this man, was using the word bastard, and I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty brave. He's a politician using the word bastard. But he was right. Both parties, both of the majors, need to be held accountable. And in fact, there's never been a time more important than today that we need to say that the values that underpin the Australian Democrats must be put front and centre, because both parties have failed. So what has brought me to the party now? The relevance of what happened 45 years ago and the urgency of keeping the bastards honest today. I spoke about 1977, but once again too, I don't see enough, let's say, migrants or people who are the children of migrants' faces. And we cannot continue to blame certain members of the community if we are not willing to raise our hands and say, we've been a member of this community and this society for a very, very long time. We've paid our taxes, etc. But how are we represented? And if you're not going to stick your hand up and not be a party to representation, well, how can you stand on the sideline and throw rocks? That's simply not good enough. It's about saying it's time to step up. You know, you have had a wonderful education, wonderful experiences in life, and once again, experiential knowledge and academic knowledge have come together to make the person that I am today.
Chris, firstly, thanks for running. Having gone through the federal election for the Senate, you know exactly what you're in for. There will be a lot of scrutiny in this by-election because it is the only show in town, so to speak. The housing issue is a big one. It's a crisis. It's not being treated as a crisis at the moment, especially over the last few weeks. We've seen it being treated as a political game more than anything else. How do we inject some urgency into it?
Great question, Steve. For a long time, for over 30 years, when I look at affordable housing, both parties have failed. They've been in lockstep in their lack of affordable housing and the lack of social housing. It's time to say that I come to the table with very, very different ideas, and I believe valuable ideas that say that housing is not a simple project. It's a mega project. It's a complex project. The thermal quality that we will need in Warrnambool and the double glazing we will need in Warrnambool is very, very different to what we will need in Cairns, what we will need in Wollongong, what we will need in Fadden. All of these areas need social housing. All of these areas have homelessness issues. They will each need quite different ways of approaching it. But we need to us as the feds need to bring state and local councils to the table. We must make sure that the community are involved, whether they're St Vincent de Paul or Red Shield. Some of these people know it better than all of us. And we as politicians or prospective politicians need to understand that we need to bring the community together. But that's what leadership is. That's what good federal government leadership is, bringing them together, bringing the right people to the table. That's not a hard mark to hit. It's going to take a lot of work, yes. Once again, too, this is entry level. This is not what property developers do. They don't build entry level. It's only responsible governments are interested in that. And I hear economists say things like, it's not a supply issue. Well, how about you go and tell that woman who's there sleeping in her station wagon with her 2 children as the result of family violence or those social issues where you can't say that to that person. She's sleeping in her car with her 2 children. It is a supply issue. And once again, too, we can't leave it to the property developers to do that. Responsible governments do that. Own the problem, own the solution, own the asset. Understand that owning the asset means you will need to manage the asset. You will need to maintain the asset. But we must start now. We can't rely on others. We can't blame the community or say the free market economy will drive this. Not good enough. The depth that we need to go to resolve this. There's 30 years of inaction. We started the discussion with $10 billion on the table. Now, the $10 billion arguably would have given us 30,000 homes. As far as we're concerned as the Australian Democrats, that's still 170,000 short of the mark. But once again, too, that's a construction issue. That's a construction issue that the federal government needs to take responsibility for. And then next minute, we have another party muddying the waters by talking about rent freezes and rent caps. Now, one is a construction issue. One is an issue of trying to govern in a way whereby you're saying we're going to put a rent cap on it. And we know full well from not just international mistakes, they don't work. It's not about rent freezes or rent caps. This is just muddying the waters. And all of a sudden, we've kicked the can down the road to October. Is that as good as we can do? Well, I'd suggest that the debate has now gone awry. We've gone down the wrong track. Let's bring it back to the table. Let's start with the $10 billion that we currently have on the table. Let's get that $10 billion started, because once again, to anybody who understands mega projects will understand that the amount of pre-work or the prelim work that we talk about needs to start now. Because in 6 months' time, the construction that we expect in 6 months' time, if we don't start the pre-planning or the prelim work now, we'll have nothing in 6 months' time. We certainly won't have anything in October. I still say this $50 billion needs to be on the table. But once again, we must start. And starting now will give us a result possibly in 12 months' time.
I think this was one of the critiques from various sides of politics about that delay. I mean, Rose Jackson, who's an MP in the New South Wales State Parliament with responsibilities for housing, like one of the ministers in the Chris Minns government in New South Wales, came out when that vote went through to delay the debate on the bill to October and said, you don't understand the amount of work that we've put in to be ready on July 1 to submit our applications for funding. It's not a small thing to be asking for a share of $500 million, which is kind of what was on the table at the time, but equally the $2 billion. It's not a small effort on our part as a government, as a state government, to be ready to put that paperwork straight away. That all goes on hold now, and it will all need to be redone. And at some point, maybe we get to start again, but exactly when that is now up in the air. So we're less able to marshal the resources that we need as a state government to have that stuff ready when it's approved. Whereas when it was going to begin on July 1, we knew exactly what we were in for and we were ready to go. We had the work, we had the paperwork, we had the plans, we had the projects. And now essentially that's all been thrown away. And the delay then ripples down the line. So that sort of cascades down into the future. That uncertainty creates more issues along the line. And I think that was one of the more disappointing aspects of it. And I think David Pocock came out, the ACT senator, came out and said he was disappointed that the Greens didn't keep the debate going. If they weren't happy with it, then keep debating it. If they really weren't happy with it, vote the damn thing down and send it back to the lower house so that somebody else could work on it, if that was what they were after, right?
Pocock's one of the few driving forces in the Senate, one of the few voices of reason. I'm not seeing too many others. I'm not seeing too many other senators that are willing to stand up and say, we need to be reasonable here. You know, like if there's $10 billion on the table, how can we at least get things going on the 1st of July? We had that opportunity. It's now been kicked down the road to October. And how much further will it be kicked down the road? How much longer will we see this inaction as we continue to see more and more homelessness and we see more and more social problems that will exacerbate? They won't get simpler. They'll get worse.
It is. It is entirely irresponsible. And I think part of it is that the debate over the HAF, or I think it's what the Housing Action Future Fund or whatever that they're calling it, it's almost become academic. As you pointed out, Steve, state governments were gearing up. They were getting contracts in place. They were planning to engage builders and surveyors and all the infrastructure required to actually put a shovel in the ground and start building actual housing. And all of that has had to go on hold. And you're right, Chris, there's sort of two arguments happening here. One is we need to pay for and we need to build social and affordable housing. No one disagrees on that. How we're going to pay for it is sort of the big debate that's happening. But then the other side of it, this whole debate around rent freezes and rent caps, it's a solution to a different problem. And the ACT has rent caps in place, but they themselves have come out and gone, yeah, they work when you have sufficient supply. And as everyone knows, we currently have a supply problem in housing.
That's right. So resolve the supply issue first, then start talking about rent caps. But if you don't have the supply issue resolved, it's pointless. Now, supply, like what has happened now, you just spoke about the planning that has already taken place. That's cost a great deal of money already. If that doesn't continue on, and you need to restart it in October, it'll be a whole new set of plans. The reason I say that money is gone, it is gone. It will have gone because many of those resources, human or otherwise, have gone elsewhere. And generally speaking, when you start a project of that type, from senior project managers to executive project managers, directors, right down to that apprentice traineeship, etc., they need to be appropriately allocated. Once the project doesn't go ahead, those people have to still pay bills. They will find themselves on other projects. When you now try and start it on the 1st of November because you've resolved it in October, guess what? Those resources aren't on the ground anymore. And this happens across Australia. I don't care if you're talking oil and gas projects. I don't care if you're talking coal projects, iron ore projects or otherwise. I've been involved with them for long enough in my life to realise what happens. And sometimes when you lose that resource, whether it be a group of Indigenous apprentices or trainees, etc., in a particular area, you lose an essential part of the project. And once again, to actually reallocate those people to it is going to cost you money that you have previously spent. And people who don't understand this concept will be forever stuck with this, let's throw in rent caps, because that's what they'll come up with, because that's what they will see, because they haven't been on the ground and actually understood what happens when these large projects that take an enormous amount of resources to man up to say, okay, we're ready to go. All of a sudden, when you lose it, it takes a long time to get it back going again. And as I said, it's a tragedy that we have people at the table doing these sorts of things. It undermines the construction of these essential projects.
So obviously housing is your special passion. And this was long before the housing crisis bit. I mean, you are a housing spokesperson in the 2022 federal election. Mm-hmm. How did you come to that? I know that, like you mentioned, being sort of a migrant or the child of migrants. What's your sort of personal backstory and how did you come to Australia?
Okay, we came to Australia in 1966. We migrated from Burma, and possibly one of the reasons I'm so passionate about the values of a democracy is Burma is still struggling with democracy, with any sort of responsible governance. And it makes the responsibility of those who migrate to a wonderful democracy, it makes your responsibility far greater to say that I value this democracy. We came here in the 60s, and 2.5 years later, we were offered a house in Western Sydney, or Mum and Dad were offered a house. So off we went to Western Sydney, and Mum and Dad turned that house into a home. Now, my siblings, who are successful business people, whether they're in a painting company, whether they were previous in air conditioning, in food and beverage, and in a multitude of yoga studios in Newcastle, they're all business owners, small business owners like myself. Yes, I've been fortunate enough to also been employed on some of the biggest projects in Australia, but I was also a builder. I was also someone who has benefited greatly from social housing, from being able to say that, not hand out, but that hand up was essential for us as a migrant family. Those 8 taxpayers, and Mum and Dad were also taxpayers, so that's 10 taxpayers, 10 migrants who has offered this community great benefits in tax, etc. But also we've benefited as a family. And I look at my nieces and nephews who have now got their own businesses too, and I think we've done very, very well. And it's now time to say, hang on, I've done well. And I believe that my education has set me up to say, okay, it's time to join the debate, join the discussion, become a responsible citizen, a responsible migrant, because many of these who are, call them refugees or migrants, they too want that opportunity. And once again, to those traineeships, that they, as adult traineeships, they too could benefit from it, but our community can benefit from it. If they're given, even if it's an adult apprenticeship, if their children are given apprenticeships or traineeships, etc., they too will not be a part of that. They won't be seen as a problem to our society. They will become an asset to our society. Yes, it may be English as a second language. Maybe we need teachers who will work beside TAFE teachers and say, this person needs an education in the language as well as an education in plumbing, in electrical, in painting, etc., etc. So all of a sudden, this person gains the language skills, but they also gain the trade skills. In 3 and 4 years' time, guess what? This person who you perceived, or we perceived as a problem not so long ago, they became the solution. They became a part of that solution. And that's integral, because if we can say that, hang on, this guy who wants to run for the seat of Fadden has actually got life experience in this area, it's not just pie in the sky. We're not talking about someone who just may have had a chance. No, he actually did it. And he brings with that experience a life of experience. So that's part of the motivation. That's part of it, saying we can get it right.
I think one of the interesting things about that story, Chris, is that what you're talking about in terms of providing those initial supports, providing that initial educational support, housing support, the ability to start participating in society in both economic and social and creative and religious ways, whatever those things might be, are a fraction of the cost that we are currently very happy to spend incarcerating refugees in detention centres, where we spend $3 million a year per person on average incarcerating a refugee, versus like a relatively small cost, and it really is a relatively small cost, to allow each and every one of those people to not only resettle, which they should absolutely be allowed to do, but the richness that they bring to this country as a result is immeasurable. And yet we seem to be such miserable bastards when the time comes to actually assist. It's counterproductive, and it's such a waste.
We had put ourselves in a position whereby, how did this happen? We're a responsible nation. We care for people. Certainly myself as a migrant, I remember like little Mrs. Mack and all these lovely ladies who, like Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree, like on this piano going, wow, I'd never heard this song before. But I was a 7-year-old kid and I loved it. I loved singing this new song. And it was those people who were, it was beyond fair and just. It was beyond the mateship, that we look after each other, we care for each other. But it was these people who bring me to the man that I am today. It was that lesson that I learned as a 7-year-old child, that this is a country that cares for people. Regardless if it's this large migrant family, we'll just bring them into our house and we'll, like, there's the scones and there's the, biscuits and the cups of tea and whatever else. And it was wonderful. It was this wonderful education about Australia. And it's still there today. That fabric hasn't gone away. The free market society that we keep projecting of ourselves, there is that. There's also a caring Australia. There are people out there who still value mateship and value looking after each other. And I can't help but say that I'm certainly the product of that. Do you know what I mean? I'm a product of those people who cared enough and said, hey, they're a migrant family. They need a bit of a hand. Let's help them out. And they did.
It certainly used to be the case, Chris, much more readily, that was how we looked after everybody. It was how we looked after people who were disadvantaged in some way, not as a burden, but as just another member of society who needed a hand, whether that was temporary or permanent support.
Part of our DNA, Steve. I think
it is still there. It is still there. We read about it far less. It's spoken about far less. It's demonized in certain quarters, but I don't think we're selfish at heart as a nation and as a people. I do think there's a generosity of spirit at the heart of Australian society, which still exists. And like you, I'd love to see more of it.
I agree, mate. And I believe it's there. It has been, as I said, there are those who will muddy it. There are those who they seem to go to great lengths, and there's certainly those within a number of different media sources who seem to want to project that. And I will argue that they're wrong. They're simply wrong. It's not there. It's they want to project more of it, that it's not as big as what they say it is. There is a caring and a sharing community out there. All they would like to be seen is to be recognised, and whether it's about refugees, whether it's about migrants, whether it's about homelessness, whether it's about anybody who is less off than we are. There's a community out there who wants to help them.
We talk about needing greater diversity in parliaments, and Leonie Green, who's our Victorian lead candidate, we were speaking the other day about, and as women, the need to stand up so that it's the whole thing of you can't be what you can't see, and she and I are feeling a responsibility as women to stand up in politics and be those I hate to use the word role models, but to be present, and for you as as a migrant and child of migrants, as you were saying, to pay back the opportunity that you've been given by Australia and the contribution that you've been allowed to make by then contributing to politics and to parliament and showing other migrants, opening up that pathway and showing them that you also have a responsibility to democracy in this country, particularly coming from other countries where democracy is under threat or is in strife. That's an incredibly powerful message, and incredibly powerful for you, I think, as a candidate to be doing that. And I mean, it sounds trite, but well done. Now, I want to have a chat to you. Now, all three of us obviously have run as candidates, and it's quite a unique experience and it's not something that everybody will go through. The Victorian team have been open about the fact that when the Aston by-election came up, they simply couldn't find someone who was willing to run. And it's curious because there does seem to be like a great deal of reluctance in the community to step up and be a candidate and represent your community. And you are now in the unique position where you've been a Senate candidate and now you're running in the lower house. What's it like to be, explain to our listeners what it's like to be a candidate and why, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but why is it so rewarding and fun to do?
It's rewarding because in the first instance, you are a part of a democracy. That's probably the most rewarding part of it, when you actually feel that, hey, I'm now a part of a democracy. My voice is going to be heard. It may only be heard by 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, but at least hopefully it's being heard. You have an opportunity to speak openly and to be able to say, look, these are the platforms of this party that I stand with, that I value, that I'm open to negotiation. I'm not going to go grandstanding. I will negotiate with either party. We're about best outcomes for all Australians. We're not here for culture wars. We're not going to get involved and be embroiled in some of the things that we've seen in recent times. And if we say we're going to set the bar a whole lot higher, that to me is bringing value to the House, because then we're saying we won't tolerate that any longer. We've seen what has happened in the more recent past, and we're going to set the bar a whole lot higher. Hopefully there will be others who will join us. Hopefully there will be others who will say, hey, you know what? He makes a point there. And regardless of whether I win or not, hopefully it will bring others to the party who will say, hang on, I'm going to have a crack at this, because it is worthwhile having a go at. And it shouldn't be left to the major parties, that we have got a voice and we should continue to be heard.
Chris, I think elections always, but by-elections in particular, provide a party like ours with a very unique opportunity to tell our story, to put forward our positions, to have a public debate about what we think is important in a way that can simply be drowned out by the noise and the circus surrounding a federal election, general election everywhere. It feels like a very good chance for us to at least talk about the substantive policy matters rather than be overwhelmed by the politics that we tend to see.
I spoke about muddying the waters earlier on with the rent caps, etc. I see so much of it. Whereby we seem to often go down the wrong track, and I don't know who it's being led by, that all of a sudden the debate that started at one point on Monday morning, by the time we got to Friday, it's totally not where we started. And the relevance of it becomes even more questionable. By the time we get to 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, well, guess what? Turn it off. We're wasting our time now, because the people at the table, they're going to fail us as well. So often, the way that the debate flows, it's like, hang on, we've actually missed where it started.
Chris, I received comments from people during the federal election when I announced that I was going to stand as a candidate. And sort of some of the feedback and reaction that I got from people was, but you're not like them. Like you're not a politician. You're not like one of those people. Why on earth would you want to become a politician? And my response was simply that if people like us won't stand for election, then that's what we'll get left with. If you want to change what a politician looks like, then you just have to stand for election and replace them.
I agree, Stephen. I think both of the majors have got the paralysis comes from they've left school with this intent, I'm going to be a politician. And sometimes these, what I call career politicians, they've been debating prior to university. They've been debating at high school level, and all of a sudden they believe that their debate is the only debate that should be at the table. And that's where I believe that it's important that those of us who've not been a part of this debate dive in and say, hang on, there are other people besides career politicians around. There are others whose voices should be heard, but more importantly, they need to raise their hands and sometimes be prepared for what may not be so pleasant, because they're going to get challenged on things that, they're going to be tough questions. And I guess part of my thing at the moment is that there's going to be some tough questions coming, like why would you want to stand now? So, okay, run it at me. As far as I'm concerned, we've got to debate it. More recently, we've had something like $300 billion allocated for something whereby, has that been appropriately discussed or debated? All of a sudden we're saying that's $300 billion, yet we can't even talk about $30 billion. We can't even talk about $10 billion. Can't even talk about $2 billion for housing.
Yeah, look, you raised a really good point around the debate. And I think because we've had this advent of the career politician sort of going from high school to uni to a staffer to a politician in both the major parties, the debate becomes the objective and winning the debate becomes the objective. Now, all three of us have worked in various types of projects. I'm in IT, Steve does design, you've been a builder. We understand implementation and actually putting a solution in place. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why all three of us gravitated to a party that is solutions focused. And I think that's probably the major differentiator, because I think all three of us have had friends and family and voters say, but you're not a politician. You're not a typical, what we typically see to be a politician. And as you said, the point of all three of us having run at some stage was to change what a politician looks like and change politics so that politics stops being about the debate and comes back to actually being about the solution and implementing the solution. And so I think it's so important for you as a non-typical politician, not just as a migrant and not just as the fact that you have real world life experience and you've actually, dare I say it, had a real job. The point is to bring that experience into Parliament and get Parliament focused on the solution as opposed to winning the debate of the day or winning the media cycle. Now, you were telling me during the week you had a conversation with I think you called him a very, very angry man who had voted Liberal in the 2022 election, and he reached out to us and specifically wanted to speak to you to get your views on certain issues that were important to him. And that's sort of where the rubber hits the road in terms of actually, going out and speaking to people in terms of campaigning. So how did that go for you?
It went really well. I must admit, I didn't know what to expect. What a wonderful gentleman who immediately shared that he had been an LNP voter for years, and he was so angry at what he had seen happen more recently, and not just at federal level. So, he was clearly angry at the LNP or the brand over a long period of time. Very well-educated gentleman, completed his PhD. He didn't say what his doctorate was in. But it was interesting to as he spoke about his life, his career, etc., and how angry he was at what more recently happened. And I think, or I feel that he was making it very, very clear that he believed that he had been deceived. We can't say enough about this. If someone feels that he has been deceived, and there are others out there, I believe, who feel similar to him, and what made it even worse, he felt nearly like he'd been deceived for a long period of time. You know what I mean? And you sort of went, wow, this is, it's insightful, but it was also a case of this has been going on for a long period of time, and now the chooks are coming home to roost.
So something that we've sort of been noticing in the lead up to, but also since the federal election in 2022, is this sense of
Mm.
betrayal from sections of the community and sections of the electorate. And it's not just around the coalition and the Liberal Party, although that's probably, where a lot of it's coming from. And certainly with the gentleman that you spoke to, I think feels a profound sense of betrayal from the party that he clearly has supported for a long time.
Mm.
But I think since the 2022 election, as the gloss is starting to wear off the Albanese government, there is also that sense of betrayal coming from that side of politics in terms of the country feeling let down and badly served by both the major parties. And harkening back to the start of the Democrats that you mentioned, the environment feels very similar to the circumstances in which the Democrats were born, because that same sense of not being served and essentially being betrayed by the majors was ripe in 1977, which is when the Democrats were born, and incidentally so was I. So I'm harkening back to what people have told me because I was born only a couple of months before the Democrats were. But I think you're right. Like this hunger for authenticity and integrity and indeed accountability. I mean, there are still sitting members of the federal parliament with massive clouds hanging over their heads in terms of their ethics and their accountability, and the fact that these people do not seem to be people of integrity. And it's not so much the rage has built and peaked in the community. I think that rage is continuing to build, and particularly among young people who don't just feel betrayed by the political class, they feel actively, stomped on by the political class. So yeah, I think this is a momentum that's building that's only going to peak, I think, over the next probably couple of election cycles. And obviously it's a wave that I think the Australian Democrats' time has sort of come round again with the need for us to be in Parliament to, as you said so eloquently, keep the bastards honest. So I'm going to sort of pivot slightly and put my pseudo-journalist hat on and ask you some hard-hitting questions, which is, you don't currently live in Fadden, which again is not a barrier to running in Fadden. I mean, everyone can run. In the 2022 federal election, One Nation bizarrely ran candidates in seats in states they didn't even live in. But it was a live question in the party when we were exploring contesting the Fadden by-election, and a concern in the party that we could not find a local candidate. Have you found it a barrier on the campaign trail? Do you think it is a live issue in Fadden? Do you feel that your passion to represent our democracy is compelling against, say, a local who's possibly more of the same in terms of being a career politician?
I think it's important to say that as a federal election, we're dealing with issues that are far more have national relevance, with due respect to those who live in Fadden. Yes, there will certainly be issues in Fadden. If I was to be successful, I would suggest to my constituents that within 90 days I would move to the area. I think it's just and reasonable to do that, so as I could represent them appropriately, not just have an office there, but also reside there. I think that's an important one to get out of the way straight up. The people that I see on the ground, yes, there was a councillor for the LNP who was putting his hand up. Certainly he's been a long time in local council. We know that there's been more than enough issues in local council level in the Gold Coast. There are certainly others who I say are local there, but others who are also on the fringe of that area who don't actually live in the Fadden area. As I said, I make a commitment to move there, and I don't reside from that. If I was to be successful, that's what I would do. But the issues of defence, issues of economy, issues of affordable housing are not peculiar to Fadden. They are national issues. Yes, there will be issues that are in regards to housing that will be in particular parts of Fadden, and they won't affect other parts of Fadden, but they'll certainly affect Fadden. They'll affect other parts of Australia as well. It is important to say that in keeping the bastards honest, I said it earlier on, we need to raise the bar. Because we've gone to a whole new low nationally and state and local. We have continued to go lower and lower, and certainly in more recent times. It's sad. It's a sad indictment on what our politicians have become. And if nothing else, as part of keeping the bastards honest, it's about lifting the bastards up, getting them out of the gutter and saying, we can do better than this. We are better than this. And in fact, stand up and be responsible for your actions. Start behaving as politicians. Start behaving as people who are just and fair and reasonable, and conduct yourself that way, not just within Canberra, but around Australia. Whenever you go back to your electorate, be that. Be the leader that you should be. That's what we're voting for, aren't we? We're voting for leaders.
Over the next 2 weeks, what can we expect to see on the ground in Fadden?
There's 2 polling booths that they're opening as of Monday. We'll be at either one of those polling booths every day. I've
Great.
got myself and one other long-time member of the party who's going to help me. So that's great to have. We are a party that is not funded by hundreds of thousands of dollars from those who will want their pound of flesh come further on down the track. No, we aren't. We haven't got a great deal of money, but that's okay. Certainly, we've got the drive and the ambition to make sure we get it right. So that's what we'll be there. We'll be there on the ground, certainly every day leading up to the election, and certainly on the 15th. I'd like to hope that we'll have at least 5 booths covered. Those booths that sit between Helensvale, Arundel, Bigara Waters, and Runaway Bay. So that's our target area, if you like. Yeah.
That's great.
It's wonderful that you're out and about. I know that you thrive on getting out there and meeting people and having a chat and having a discussion. I mean, you don't always have people like the doctor that you spoke to who necessarily agree with you, but having watched you on the campaign trail, you really thrive on that constructive debate and that discussion of ideas and the finding of solutions and things. So if anyone's in Fadden and they want to come have a chat with Chris, then obviously you'll be at pre-poll. So come on down and I don't know if there'll be any democracy sausages there, but you'll at least get to have a chat with you and get your how to vote card.
I look forward to having a chat with all. Yeah, look forward to it.
Yeah. What do the voters of Fadden need to know about you as a candidate and us as a party as they start considering their choices?
They will find in me someone who essentially we lift the bar, we raise the bar, we say that things that have happened in more recent times are simply not good enough. And we can do better, and we will do better. My job, if I get the job, is to work for the people of Fadden, and that's what I will commit to do. I will commit to them every day and make sure that their voices are heard in Canberra.
Brilliant. So the Democrats, we took a comprehensive suite of policies to the 2022 federal election, and they're obviously still in place. They're under review at the moment because we're sort of halfway through the election cycle. But we chose to focus on, there's always integrity and accountability. That's a given for us. And obviously, responsible action on climate change is another given. So, but apart from those two, we chose to focus on just 3 policy areas just to, I think, make it relevant to people and to focus on the things that are, I think, impacting people on a day-to-day basis at the moment. Do you want to take us through the policy positions that we're choosing to focus on for Fadden? And obviously we've spoken at length about affordable housing, which is obviously the clear front runner. So take us through the economy and our strong defence.
I guess with the economy, which this is one of those ones that's really important to me. I can't help but say there are many people in Fadden who would be taxpayers, they'd be small business owners. Some of them would be retired folk. But I can't help but say many of these people would pay more than their fair share of tax. And there would be others at the other end of town, the big end of town, who aren't paying their fair share. So these are the first areas that we must look at long and hard. We need to simplify the tax system. And I know that the Australian Democrats have spoken about this for a very long time. There have been many who have spoken about this a long time ago, but it seems like both parties are in lockstep, both of the majors are in lockstep to not do anything about taxation. We've got to address it. The tax system is simply not good enough. It's not good enough, and we must get it right. I'll go to defence now. And we have looked at it now for a while, and certainly, and I look at defensive as compared to offensive weaponry. We look at what we're allocating towards 3 pieces of kit that we can't even service ourselves. Let's start there. As compared to defence, that whereby we can increase our manufacturing capabilities. You have to remember that as a 16-year-old, I started in a metal trade. I'm talking about metal industries that can actually be pivotal to defending ourselves. We are an island, and there are systems whereby we can launch from land that can look after these borders 200 kilometres out to sea and more with pinpoint accuracy. We've had our own Army, Navy and Defence in more recent times spend over $100 million in looking at drones and robotics. The stats are out there. It's not just Queensland universities that are leading charge. ANU is involved as well, and we're very, very good at it. Now, let's start to use our own manufacturing capability. Let's start to look at the CSIRO and those bodies which we've underfunded for a long period of time. Let's start to say we can get this right. We've done our homework. Let's start to look at how we can defend ourselves. It doesn't mean there's also an issue whereby we can We can walk and chew gum. We can have particular alliances that we would say, yes, we need to make them work, but we can also establish a manufacturing in Australia that can underpin our long-term defence systems. And they can be started. Let's suggest that those in the West would collaborate with one particular nation. Those in the East would collaborate with somebody else closer to the eastern seaboard. But there's no reason why we can't collaborate with others and have different collaborations going on and manufacturing in different states. We have the skill. We just need the will. We just need the willpower to go make it happen. And manufacturing in Australia can come back, but there's specialised forms of manufacture that will defend us a long time into the future.
Fantastic. Steve, did you have any questions or?
I don't have any final thoughts for Chris, just to wish him all the best, Chris, in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Good luck on the 15th, and we will absolutely be cheering you on when the polls close at 6 p.m. and when Anthony Green stands up there and starts telling us how well you've done.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to hope to. I'd just love to see my Anthony Green standing beside my name.
There you go.
That'd be wonderful. I just see him as one of these great minds. He really is. He's one of the commentators and just so well versed. Just knows he's done his homework.
He is a wonderful human being, and he is quite an impressive intellect as well.
One of the things that I think has been wonderful and really exciting for the party is that the whole party has sort of galvanised to get behind you and to support you when you run in Fadden. And it's not just a Queensland issue or a job for the Queensland division. The whole party feels that it's incredibly important to get you out there and support your run. And it's been super exciting and it's what we live for as a political party. Our job is to contest elections. So I know that the Victorian team were bitterly disappointed that they didn't get a chance with Aston. So the fact that you guys were able to do it with Fadden it's really made them happy and sort of galvanised them as well. So we know that you will do us proud in Fadden in the final result, and we can't wait to see your name up next to Anthony Green's on the night of the 15th, and we'll see how you go.
I look forward to coming to Cook in the not too distant future, Steve, to help you.
Thanks.
I'm sure Cook's not far away.
Cook is not far away. I don't know that I'm willing to stand in the seat of Cook, but we do have members who live in that electorate who have expressed an interest in putting themselves forward should the opportunity arise. So that's going to be a fun one on the near horizon.
I keep thinking of a gold medal to Bradbury. The four of them fell over.
Yep.
It's possible.
Yep.
Dream the dream.
Absolutely. And you miss every shot you don't take and all of those sorts of metaphors we can throw at it. But good luck, Chris.
Thank you very much.
I'm thankful for you standing forward and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us and sharing your remarkable life story and your passion for social justice and equity, particularly around the crisis in housing that the country is experiencing at the moment. Good luck for the 15th of July. If you live in Fadden or you know people who live in Fadden and who will be voting on the 15th, please share this episode with your friends and family so they can meet at least one of the candidates they'll be preferencing on the day. If you want to meet Chris and have a chat, he'll be at pre-poll every day this week leading up to the election on Saturday. If you don't live in Fadden, but you want to support Chris and the Australian Democrats, you can donate to us or volunteer to help Chris's campaign. There are links in the show notes to donate or get in touch with the campaign team to volunteer. Thank you to everyone who commiserated with me on having to find a new home. I'm really happy and grateful to be able to report that my personal housing crisis has been solved, and I'm in the process of moving house as we record this. And my apologies in advance if moving house ends up messing with our podcasting schedule. There's been a lot going on in Australian politics the last few weeks. Apart from the Fadden by-election, we've had the New South Wales ICAC deliver their long-awaited report into Gladys Berejiklian. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission has delivered its report into a scheme deemed both illegal and cruel, and the National Anti-Corruption Commission has opened its doors. We have episodes coming up on all of those issues, as well as a special new listener-requested Q&A segment. Stay tuned for all of those. In the meantime, if you live in Fadden, vote 1 Australian Democrats on the 15th of July. Keep the Bastards Honest is brought to you by the Australian Democrats. This episode was edited and produced by me, Elana Mitchell. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Spoutable, and Threads by searching for Australian Democrats. And you can see what we stand for, what we value, and what our policy positions are at our website at democrats.org.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.